It's another embarrassment for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, but it's hard to see at the moment just what impact it will really have, because the court has decided that he was unlawful to suspend Parliament in the way that he has done, but Parliament has already been suspended, and they haven't actually made an order against the Prime Minister because they're awaiting a Supreme Court case here in London, which is due to start next Tuesday. Now, in the UK, Scotland has its own legal system. I think the Supreme Court case will be the much more kind of interesting episode for Boris Johnson, but we'll see whether or not the judges in the Supreme Court case next week take notice of this Scottish decision. And what they said actually was quite damning. They said that the Prime Minister it was an egregious case for failure to comply with generally accepted standards of behaviour of public authorities. And one judge said the circumstances, particularly the length of prorogation, showed that the purpose was to prevent such scrutiny. So this is more testing of Boris Johnson's character. We saw some of the documents that came out in this case didn't portray him in a good light. Things like him calling David Cameron a girly swat at one point in the notes about proroguing Parliament. And so the Prime Minister now will be maybe a little bit more worried about next week's Supreme Court case.
It seems there's not a day that goes by where we don't talk about the UK being in uncharted waters, but could we be looking at a situation perhaps where Scotland's High Appeals Court has made one decision and the UK's or England's Supreme Court makes another?
Yeah, it could, because the Supreme Court is the highest court in the land, so that is the normal procedure. The highest court overrules lower courts. And Downing Street have put out a statement saying they are disappointed by the decision, but they will appeal at the Supreme Court. Proroguing Parliament is the legal and necessary way of delivering their new domestic legislative agenda, is what they're saying. There is no question that Parliament can be prorogued for a Queen's speech. It's just whether or not the reasons behind it were put rightly to the Queen or not. That is the real test here. And the Labour Party as well have come out in the last while saying that this ruling shows, despite what Boris Johnson has spent his privileged life thinking, he is not above the law. And they are calling it an elitist shutdown. Now, that is some quite interesting language from Labour, but it really remains to be seen next week in the Supreme Court whether or not Boris Johnson is really dealt another blow by their decision. And they could make an order that Parliament needs to come back and he'll be under much more scrutiny.